The vessel is sitting at Fort Pierce. That is not rumor. That is not some wild theory on social media.
It is a documented, photographed, and verified fact.
The United States Coast Guard seized the Soulmate on Saturday, May 9, 2026. By Monday morning, drone footage and a reporter in a borrowed kayak confirmed what investigators already knew. The boat is now in federal custody, secured to a dock at the United States Coast Guard Station in Fort Pierce, Florida, as the forensic examination officially begins.
The single question this entire case has built toward for 6 weeks is, where is Lynette Hooker?
To be clear, Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime yet. Everything you will hear is drawn strictly from verified reporting and confirmed public records. This is not a verdict. No judgment has been reached, and no charges are filed. This is an investigation, alive, highly active. Federally supervised search for answers, and this documentary will treat it exactly like that. The vessel was always the true center of this story. Not because anyone had to say so, but due to basic logic, hard facts, and because everything Brian Hooker claims happened on the night of April 4, 2026. Every element of his story to Bahamian authorities, every detail written in his Facebook post, and every word spoken during that recorded phone call to a friend involved that vessel, centered around that vessel, or happened in the water between Hopetown and that boat. The Soulmate was where that night should have ended. It was their destination. It was the physical sanctuary that Brian Hooker claimed he tried reaching when his wife fell overboard. Whatever really happened out there that night, the Soulmate is the only physical structure that was present for all of it and for the aftermath that followed. And 5 weeks after Lynette vanished, federal investigators decided it was time to uncover what that vessel was hiding before the Soulmate became a crime scene. Before the police tape rose, and before forensic investigators stepped aboard, Brian and Lynette Hooker built a life that millions of people only dream about, and very few actually achieve. Naming their social media brand the Sailing Hookers, they documented every leg of their ocean journey. They were a couple in their 50s who rejected a quiet retirement, realizing that the suburban house, the driveway, and the predictable routine of life on land was not the final chapter they wanted. They chose the open sea. They chose a sailboat. They chose the Abacos. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old and Brian was 58. Together, they had been married for 25 years. Judging by the outward appearances on their social channels, they lived the exact life others only pinned to vision boards. The Soulmate was no ordinary vessel. It stood as the symbol of a bold decision they made together. A deep commitment to a freedom that required sacrificing landward stability for the open water. This context is vital, not because it shifts the odds of what occurred, but because it defines the boat itself. The Soulmate was never some weekend cruiser they took out occasionally. It was their permanent home. They lived aboard. They slept there. They cooked their meals there. Every single square inch of that vessel was touched by two people who were supposed to be embarking on the next chapter of their shared lives, moving through and living in it for months.
That is the precise environment federal forensic units are searching right now, room by room, surface by surface, in Fort Pierce, Florida.
Roughly a week before federal agents seized the Soulmate, the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service made a public move that anyone watching this case closely knew was a massive escalation. They put out photos of another sailboat, pleading with the public to help identify it. That mystery vessel was anchored right near the Soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay, the quiet stretch of Elbow Cay where the yacht sat anchored on April 4th. The final day anyone other than Brian Hooker actually saw Lynette alive. An internal Coast Guard memo obtained by CBS News stated plainly that the people on board that unidentified boat might have key details for the federal investigation. By then, the criminal investigators of the Coast Guard had completely transitioned from simply playing a supporting role in a missing person case
to taking absolute charge of their own active criminal probe.
And their very first public move was finding out who else shared those waters on April 4th.
That is how detectives hunt for key witnesses when they do not buy the story they have been told.
A team working the edges of the crime scene, demanding to know who saw what, who heard what, and who was close enough to Aunt Pat's Bay that night to witness anything unusual. To this day, that second sailboat has never been publicly identified. No news reports have ever named the owner or those on board. But investigators desperately wanted to interview them, and that intense focus,
That clear paper trail showing their search for anyone else on the water,
proves that federal agents were analyzing the scene with a level of deep and systematic scrutiny that went far beyond a standard search for a missing person. That public plea was made barely a week before the soulmate departed the Bahamas for the final time.
Lynette Hooker's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, was watching closely.
She tracked the sailboat's movements, the desperate way any daughter would grasp at any available clue.
When authorities offer no real answers and your mother has been gone for more than a month.
Then on Mother's Day, Sunday, May 11th,
2026, her very first Mother's Day without her mom, Carly uploaded a gut-wrenching video to social media.
in the clip, she laid out exactly what she had discovered. 2 unknown men were sailing the soulmate, strangers whose faces she had never laid eyes on before.
Neither was Brian. They were navigating the vessel north up the eastern coast toward Florida, and she noted,
With deep concern, that they had completely shut off their tracking system. The Coast Guard had not even reached out to her before she filmed that video. So this yacht is being moved by 2 strangers, and neither is Brian. I have never laid eyes on them.
and they went dark, shutting down their tracker. I still have not heard a single thing from the Coast Guard.
She had no idea federal agents had already seized the vessel.
Merely hours after she posted, CBS News broke the story.
Federal agents had intercepted the soulmate on Saturday,
May 9th, while it sailed toward the United States. By the time Carly uploaded her video on Sunday, the yacht was docked at Fort Pierce.
The soulmate had slipped out of Marsh Harbor on Friday, May 8th.
2 hired delivery sailors contracted to pilot the vessel back to America, according to reporting from News Nation's Ashley Banfield.
They were at the helm.
Banfield called the Coast Guard's operation an interdiction.
They intercepted the vessel sailing north toward the United States,
And the Coast Guard escorted it directly to Florida under federal custody.
These delivery sailors faced no charges. They weren't even suspects.
Absolutely nothing in the verified reports suggests they are under criminal investigation. They took a job. They just sailed the boat. When the Coast Guard closed in, they found cooperative hired hands mid-assignment.
Whatever they told Brian Hooker,
If they shared anything at all during the crossing, or at the moment of interception, remains a tightly guarded secret. By Monday morning,
On May 11th, drone cameras spotted the soulmate docked at the Fort Pierce Coast Guard station.
CBS News quickly broadcast the footage. Blocked from flying a drone near that restricted military airspace, News Nation's Brian Enton explained to his viewers exactly what he had to do.
he grabbed a neighbor's kayak and paddled out, getting close enough to capture the seized vessel on camera for the record.
I actually borrowed this kayak in Fort Pierce,
Florida, because this was the only way to get anywhere near that boat.
That is the Coast Guard station, and that boat is the soulmate.
That is Brian Hooker's own sailboat.
a reporter paddling a kayak just to verify a seized sailboat at a federal compound.
That shows the sheer intensity of this investigation. By Tuesday morning, May 12th,
Fox News Digital published exclusive photos showing yellow crime scene tape draped over the soulmate's hull as it sat tied to the dock.
An inside source confirmed to Fox News that forensic teams were already processing the boat for evidence.
Investigators wearing black shirts with bright yellow letters,
Tan pants and blue protective gloves were seen combing the vessel on Tuesday. According to local Treasure Coast News, whose reporters were watching closely, this forensic work continued straight through Wednesday, May 13th.
As the forensic search of the soulmate intensified, Brian Hooker, the sailboat's registered owner, remained deep in the continental United States, completely unreachable, silent, and avoiding all media inquiries.
His attorney in Michigan,
Crystal Marie Hauser, had earlier pleaded with the public to show Brian some grace. She stated on the record that everyone processes grief in their own way.
she asked that people treat Brian with the same empathy they would want.
But when CBS News reached out to Hauser on May 12 about the seizure and forensic activity at Fort Pierce, she abruptly hung up.
She refused to answer questions or offer any kind of formal statement.
She just ended the call, signaling the tight-lipped strategy of Brian Hooker's legal team right now.
His sailboat was now inside a federal lab. No statements, zero comments. But we must rewind to April 4th, because once federal agents took custody of the soulmate, the events of that fateful night took on an entirely new meaning.
The core details remained the same.
And Brian Hooker's story hasn't wavered from day one. But his claims will now be weighed against physical evidence pulled by forensic teams from the very boat at the heart of this mystery. This major shift forces us to re-examine the night of April 4th with fresh eyes. Brian Hooker told Bahamian investigators that he and Lynette left the shoreline, departing Hopetown in a small dinghy around 7:30 p.m. on April 4th, 2026.
Their main vessel, the Soulmate, was anchored near Elbow Cay, just off Aunt Pat's Bay.
The tiny dinghy they used was only 8 feet long.
According to a phone call Brian later made to a friend, neither of them was wearing any kind of life jacket.
He claimed the weather conditions were rough. He reported that winds were whipping at roughly 20 miles per hour.
In those harsh conditions on that tiny vessel, he claims Lynette fell overboard.
On the call with his friend, he described it as her simply bouncing off the boat.
He told Bahamian investigators that when Lynette went overboard, the boat's ignition key was in her pocket.
With that key gone, the engine died instantly.
He claimed he couldn't restart it, as the wind and currents swept them apart.
Unable to reach her despite his efforts, he began paddling back to shore.
He finally reached the marina at Marsh Harbor around 4 in the morning on April 5th.
Some 8 to 8.5 hours after he claims Lynette went overboard.
Yet, he did not call the authorities that night. He didn't raise any alarm.
For 8 long hours on the water, he never contacted the marina or local emergency services.
He slipped into Marsh Harbor in the pitch-black morning hours after that grueling 8-hour paddle.
Yet he waited until the following morning to report his wife missing. Bahamian police arrested Brian on April 8th, 4 days after Lynette vanished.
They locked him up for 5 days of intense questioning.
On April 13th, they released him without filing charges. The very next day, Brian spoke to the press, claiming his only focus was getting back out to search for Lynette.
He told reporters,
"My only focus is to get back to the boat, then hire or beg people to help me find places to search." Speaking directly to NBC News, he said, "I have never harmed Lynette. I would never harm her, and I want to find her."
Just hours after that interview, Brian Hooker fled the Bahamas. His Bahamian lawyer, Terrell Butler, confirmed his quick departure in an official statement. After being released from custody with no charges, Mr. Hooker faced a brand new emergency, on top of the trauma of his missing wife of 25 years. He reportedly received urgent word that his mother was gravely ill. He rushed back to the United States to sit by her bedside during this critical crisis. Butler refused to share Brian's exact destination inside the country. He slipped away on a commercial flight. Since then, he hasn't returned to the Bahamas, hasn't stepped foot on the Soulmate, and has offered no public statements since the vessel was seized. Brian Hooker's public Facebook post,
shared online just days after Lynette went missing, demands a much closer look.
Not simply as an expression of grief,
but as a piece of evidence to measure against the forensic findings from the soulmate.
He wrote that he was utterly devastated by what he termed a recent boating accident,
blaming rough seas and heavy winds for throwing Lynette from their small dinghy near Abaco Inn in the Bahamas. He stated that despite his frantic efforts to reach her, the strong winds and currents quickly tore them apart.
But forensic investigators don't treat Facebook posts as evidence.
They examine surfaces. They analyze biological trace material, physical disruption, and the patterns of what is missing.
But they are also scrutinizing the story they have to disprove.
And the narrative Brian Hooker has stuck to since April 5th
always comes back to one claim. Lynette fell from a small boat during rough weather, and he simply could not reach her. Now, the soulmate is about to tell its own story.
Whether that story backs up Brian or completely shatters it is what federal investigators are trying to figure out.
Renowned forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan,
who spoke to Fox News Digital right after the boat was seized, pointed out exactly what the team at Fort Pierce is prioritizing first.
His explanation is crucial because it is so precise.
Large pools of blood, Morgan explained, meaning a massive, heavy amount of dried blood.
Did someone try to sanitize the crime scene or clean up the area?
He noted that investigators are checking for signs of a struggle, specifically looking for broken items of any kind.
He explained they would search the boat for any trace evidence left behind,
to give them a clear indication of what happened,
of whether some kind of violent act actually took place.
Let us break down what that actually means in a real investigation.
Because the formal language of forensic science often hides
the extreme surgical precision of what investigators are doing on a boat during a case like this.
When Morgan talks about large focal areas of blood,
he's describing one of the most stubborn forms of biological evidence a forensic team can look for.
Blood, especially in large amounts, is incredibly hard to completely wash away from a boat. It sinks into wood grain. It seeps right into fiberglass laminate. It pools in the lowest corners of deck surfaces,
in cabin corners, and along bunk edges. When someone tries to scrub away blood, especially using water and bleach,
the most common cleaning items you find on a sailboat,
they actually end up making the evidence stand out even more.
Because luminol and other high-tech chemical sprays are designed
to light up when contacting microscopic blood, even if someone has vigorously scrubbed and cleaned the area.
If there was a major loss of blood anywhere aboard the soulmate, on the deck, down below, inside the cabin, or even on the dinghy,
the forensic team has advanced tools that will find it,
even if weeks have passed and they tried to clean it.
Morgan's point about sanitization is just as crucial. A spotless vessel.
A vessel that looks suspiciously scrubbed in ways that do not match normal marine upkeep is itself a vital clue. The pattern of cleanup paints a clear picture: where it was done, how deeply, and what products were used.
All of that is easily decoded by a forensic investigator who knows the difference between routine yacht upkeep
and a vessel that has undergone heavy, targeted cleaning in specific spots.
Beyond the blood, investigators are hunting for what experts call trace evidence, things like loose fibers, hair, skin cells, and materials transferred between surfaces by physical contact.
A boat where two people lived for a long period of time holds a massive amount of physical and biological trace evidence.
The question is not whether those traces exist, but what those clues reveal about the specific events investigators are focusing on. And then there is the structural evidence, the breakage Morgan pointed out. Damaged deck hardware, bent railings, cleats, the dinghy mount, the anchor rig, and cabin fittings.
A violent struggle aboard a boat leaves marks completely different from the normal wear of ocean sailing.
Experienced forensic investigators easily spot the difference between a cleat damaged by rope, pulling under heavy load, and one broken by something else entirely. They know when a cabin interior was tossed around by rough seas versus one trashed in a violent confrontation. The soulmate is now a suspected crime scene secured inside a federal forensics facility.
The investigators, examining the boat, are using every tool in the modern forensics playbook.
But there is a hard reality that any honest report on this case must acknowledge.
The soulmate sat out in the harsh tropical elements for 5 weeks before arriving in Fort Pierce.
5 weeks of baking Bahamian sun.
Salty humidity, intense equatorial heat, heavy rain, and constant open-air exposure.
DNA and biological material decay fast in those conditions. Nature does not stop just because evidence is critical.
Morgan was completely blunt about this. He did not sugarcoat the reality.
Building a case is far more difficult without a body. He noted about bringing charges, but it is by no means impossible. The federal forensics team stepped onto the soulmate knowing exactly the hurdles they faced.
They did not confiscate this boat, expecting it to give up easy answers.
They took custody because it represents the most critical piece of physical evidence. Tied to this case, that the United States government actually had the legal power to seize.
And because some evidence,
even severely degraded, is far better than nothing. The absence of a guarantee is not the absence of a result. Forensic analysis of highly challenging,
Compromised, and old scenes has secured convictions in case after case throughout the history of American criminal justice.
The investigators working at Fort Pierce are seasoned professionals. They are dealing with a tough scene. But they are not dealing with an impossible one.
the legal framework behind everything you have seen unfold in this case is the one thing rarely discussed in the mainstream media coverage. Yet, it is the single most important factor in understanding
Exactly what confiscating the soulmate means for the future direction of this investigation. The soulmate sails under an American flag. That one fact, that this vessel is registered in the United States,
brings massive legal consequences that touch every part of this case.
It dictates what the Coast Guard can do, which evidence is admissible,
what charges can be filed, and which federal court has jurisdiction over the prosecution.
These legal ramifications were broken down for reporters by Kenneth Engerand,
an adjunct professor of maritime law teaching at the University of Houston Law Center,
as well as the president of the Brown Sims law firm in Houston, Texas.
He is recognized as one of the most cited maritime scholars in the United States.
His extensive legal writings have been quoted by the United States Supreme Court and cited in federal appeals courts nationwide, from California to New York. This is no talking head or television legal pundit.
He is an active practitioner and scholar who has spent his entire career mastering the laws that govern this exact situation.
Engerand provided critical insights into the seizure of the soulmate.
and what he laid out on the record,
Cited by name, establishes the exact legal framework governing everything that comes next.
when asked if the Coast Guard needed a warrant to seize the soulmate, Engerand was absolutely clear.
They possess the power to impound any vessel suspected of being involved in criminal activity. In short, their authority is absolute.
No warrant, no judge's order, and absolutely no Fourth Amendment protections available to the boat's owner.
The Coast Guard holds the power to seize this boat. They have the legal right to impound any vessel they suspect is linked to a crime.
The Coast Guard made the call that the soulmate was directly tied to an active criminal investigation. And under the specific federal laws governing American-flagged vessels, that decision alone was enough.
The seizure is ironclad under the legal framework Engerand outlined. But the warrant issue is actually the minor point in his analysis.
The bigger question, the one this entire case revolves around, is whether the United States actually has the jurisdiction to prosecute crimes committed in Bahamian waters on an American vessel involving American citizens.
Engerand's direct answer,
Delivered straight to Fox News Digital,
stands as one of the single most critical legal statements in connection with this entire case.
The United States has every right to charge a violation of the federal murder statute.
It also holds jurisdiction over laws
concerning violent acts committed on any United States vessel.
That is a completely separate offense.
But both crimes are fully prosecutable when they involve American citizens on American vessels, even in foreign territory.
Both the murder statute and the law governing violent acts on American vessels are fully available.
Both are fully applicable. And both can be tried in an American federal court by federal prosecutors against American citizens for crimes committed in the Bahamas.
This is not just some loose theory floated by a defense lawyer. This is established maritime law regarding jurisdiction, explained clearly by one of the country's leading maritime authorities, speaking directly on the record in connection with this specific case.
Brian Hooker has not been charged.
That remains the most critical fact in this entire case, and it must be stated clearly and completely.
Yet, a lack of charges does not mean a lack of legal power to file them.
It simply means they do not have enough evidence to back them up yet.
That exact gap,
the divide between legal power and solid proof, is precisely what the forensic team in Fort Pierce is working to close.
Engeren's breakdown of how this Coast Guard probe links to the federal prosecution process
is the key part of his analysis that mainstream media outlets have largely overlooked.
The Coast Guard Investigative Service does not work in a vacuum.
They build their cases hand in hand with the United States Attorney's Office in the local district.
For this investigation, that means the Southern District of Florida, which holds jurisdiction over Fort Pierce.
What needs to happen next is for the Coast Guard to gather the necessary evidence.
Working directly with the federal prosecutor in Florida, Engeren told Fox News Digital.
They can't file charges without solid proof, and that's exactly why they are on the vessel.
They are hunting for proof.
That single line, that is why they are on the boat. It is the clearest explanation of what is unfolding at that Fort Pierce dock.
Feds did not seize the soulmate just to check off some bureaucratic box.
They did not intercept the sailboat at sea and tow it here because they had nothing better to do. They seized the vessel because they believe it holds critical evidence.
And the intense work underway at the dock, those blue gloves,
the yellow crime scene tape, days of highly systematic examination,
is the process of building evidence into something the United States Attorney's Office can use to file criminal charges.
Maritime expert Engeren explained the legal standard, which dictates exactly how far the Coast Guard can push their search before needing official warrants.
Under federal laws governing American-flagged vessels, the Coast Guard can run a complete,
incredibly thorough investigation
of the boat and everything that happened on board without getting a search warrant.
Right up until the exact moment.
Their active investigation zeroes in on one specific person as a suspect.
At that critical transition, the legal standard shifts to reasonable suspicion.
Not probable cause. Not a formal warrant requirement, but reasonable suspicion that a specific person did a specific thing. Federal investigators still do not need a warrant to dig into activities on the ship,
provided it is American-flagged. Engeren confirmed this legal threshold is lower than most people realize.
Federal authority here is far broader than current media coverage suggests.
The legal machinery backing the federal government in this case is massive,
fully operational, and being aggressively put to use right now.
Yet, the one question that has never been answered in this probe, the question left dangling when Brian Hooker paddled ashore and remains unanswered to this day, is the simplest one.
Where is Lynette Hooker?
She has vanished, despite weeks of structured search operations in the waters of Elbow Cay, Hopetown, and across the Abaco Island chain. Absolutely no sign of Lynette Hooker has been found. No body, no personal items, no physical clues from the ocean. The Bahamian search recovered nothing.
Even informal search efforts turned up nothing.
Lynette Hooker, 55 years old, a devoted mother, skilled sailor, and a woman who structured her retirement around the open ocean, has not been seen since April 4th.
Without a body, can prosecutors still file federal charges?
It is the central question hovering over this mystery from day one, and the real answer,
Engeren's direct answer.
The truth, grounded deep in the reality of the American criminal justice system,
is not at all what most people would assume.
building a case sometimes takes much more effort.
Engerand told Fox News Digital, and that is precisely the hurdle here, because there is no victim's body. He was very specific about the practical reality.
The legal standard to bring charges does not shift simply because a body is missing.
What changes is the sheer volume of work needed to prove it.
Without physical remains,
Prosecutors cannot lean on autopsy reports, toxicology results, or direct pathological proof showing the cause of death.
They have to assemble a solid case from other clues, physical evidence recovered from the scene,
forensic test results, and behavioral history. Their communications, their entire pattern of behavior before and after she vanished.
Building a case without a body is incredibly difficult, Ingram noted, but it is far from impossible.
In fact, American legal history shows that
prosecutors can secure murder convictions without ever finding a body.
no physical remains is definitely a challenge, but it is not a legal barrier.
And in this specific case, the forensic sweep of the soulmate represents the team's best shot at finding crucial physical evidence,
Capable of building a strong case without a victim's body.
whatever the Coast Guard recovers from that boat or fails to find.
Since an empty space is also evidence, shapes the case file the United States Attorney's Office will evaluate.
This process is deliberate and highly methodical.
It moves slowly, but it is absolutely happening.
We need to look closely at this investigation's full timeline.
Because tracking these events as one continuous narrative instead of isolated moments changes the entire picture.
On April 4, 2026, around 7:30 in the evening, Brian Hooker claims he and Lynette left Hopetown by dinghy.
He claims Lynette fell overboard.
He says the engine died, the key was lost, and the current swept them apart.
By April 5th, around 4 in the morning, Brian Hooker reaches the Marsh Harbor Marina after spending roughly 8 hours in the open water by his own account.
He never calls the police that night. Instead, later that morning, Hooker formally reports his wife missing to Bahamian authorities.
By April 8th, the Royal Bahamas Police Force takes Brian Hooker in for questioning.
That very day, the United States Coast Guard confirms they have launched a criminal probe. Then, on April 13th, Hooker is released from Bahamian custody after 5 grueling days of interrogation, without any charges.
The next day, Hooker addresses the media, claiming his absolute focus is getting back on the water to search for Lynette.
He tells NBC News directly,
I have never harmed Lynette, and I would never harm Lynette, and I just want to find Lynette.
Just hours after giving that interview, Brian Hooker flees the Bahamas.
His Bahamian attorney, Terrell Bevlin,
releases an official statement confirming his departure, citing a grave illness with his terminally ill mother.
Butler refuses to disclose Brian's destination within the United States.
Through late April and late May, Hooker never returns to the Bahamas. He never returns to the soulmate.
The vessel sits abandoned at Marsh Harbor while the investigation quietly intensifies.
By early May, the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service uploads photos of a mysterious sailboat anchored near the soulmate at Aunt Pat's Bay around April 4th.
They plea for the public's help in identifying this vessel. CGSIS confirms they are conducting active witness interviews in tandem.
On May 8, 2026, the soulmate leaves Marsh Harbor with 2 complete strangers aboard, unrecognized by Carly Ellsworth.
The boat's GPS goes dark mid-crossing. On May 9th, the U.S. Coast Guard intercepts the soulmate en route to the United States, an action that News Nation's Ashley Banfield describes as an interdiction.
On May 11th, Mother's Day,
Aerial drone footage confirms the soulmate is docked at Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station.
Carly Ellsworth uploads a heartbreaking Mother's Day video,
showing strangers sailing her mother's boat out of the Bahamas with the GPS cut off, speaking on her very first Mother's Day without her mother's voice.
May 12th.
Fox News Digital publishes photos of crime scene tape wrapped around the soulmate.
An insider confirms forensic processing is actively underway.
Investigators wearing blue gloves are spotted on the yacht's deck.
Crystal Hauser, Brian Hooker's Michigan attorney, hangs up on CBS News, refusing to answer.
On May 13th, forensic processing is confirmed ongoing.
Read that entire sequence as one continuous story and try telling me this feels like a standard missing person investigation.
Crystal Marie Hauser, the Michigan attorney representing Brian Hooker, has been Brian Hooker's main public-facing legal representative in the United States during this investigation. Prior to the seizure, her public messaging remained remarkably consistent and clear. She asked everyone to give Brian the benefit of the doubt. She urged people to understand that everyone processes grief in their own way.
She requested that the public treat Brian exactly how they would want to be treated.
I would ask those watching to treat him the way you would want to be treated, giving him the benefit of the doubt.
And to recognize that none of us, including you, when looking at your own relationships or the way you speak to each other, we all handle trauma differently, Hauser said. On the surface, it sounds reasonable.
This is the typical stance for defense counsel in high-profile cases drawing heavy public scrutiny, and it carried,
at its very core, a quiet admission that the way Brian Hooker was acting seemed strange enough to demand some kind of public defense.
When CBS News reached Hauser on May 12th,
the very day those photos of the crime scene tape surfaced,
the same day insiders confirmed a forensic team was already on board the soulmate, she hung up.
There was no statement, no comment, no acknowledgement, and definitely no standard claim that her client denies any wrongdoing and is fully cooperating.
The line went completely dead. That is not a strategy designed to project confidence.
That is a defense tactic signaling a deliberate choice to say absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
While federal agents in blue gloves systematically search a vessel docked in Fort Pierce.
Brian Hooker himself has not spoken a word publicly since the seizure.
No media outlet has been able to confirm his exact location inside the United States. We know he is in the country and has hired defense lawyers. As far as public records indicate, he is simply watching the case unfold from afar. He has made a conscious effort to distance himself from the sailing life he once built with Lynette. One of the most heartbreaking human elements to surface during the weeks before the boat's seizure was a statement by Blaine Stevenson. Not a police detective, not a relative of Lynette's, but a close friend. Someone who spent time with both Brian and Lynette as a couple.
Who connected with them through the local sailing scene, spending enough time to receive a trusted phone call right after she went missing.
Stevenson revealed to CBS News that he sent Brian Hooker a direct message.
He shared the exact words of that message with reporters.
They trusted you with their loved one, and you did not live up to it. Stevenson was referring to Lynette's family. He meant the daughter and mother who trusted the man she was with to bring her back home, or at the very least, to return with some honest answers.
He stated he had strongly urged Brian to be fully transparent with detectives.
He was pressuring Brian directly, urging him on a personal level to speak up and cooperate much more fully, to give Lynette's family some solid answers to hold on to.
That message, its bluntness, its raw directness.
A public call-out from a close friend is incredibly rare, especially this early in an active federal investigation where things are usually kept completely quiet.
Those closest to Brian Hooker are not protecting him anymore. The friends who knew both him and Lynette are refusing to offer him blind support. A close companion messaged him directly,
stating plainly that he had betrayed a grieving family's trust.
Brian Hooker has remained completely silent.
From the very start, Carly Ellsworth has been the most consistent and clear voice in this entire investigation.
She was doubting Brian's story long before the national media even noticed the case. She described a long history of deeply troubling behavior in their relationship.
Claims that Brian Hooker's attorneys have flatly denied. She has never stopped searching. She has never stopped demanding answers.
She refused to let the public forget a case that could easily have been buried under endless paperwork and slow government bureaucracy.
And on Mother's Day, the most painful day imaginable for a daughter who has no idea where her mother's body is, she spoke.
"This is my first Mother's Day without my mom," she shared. "It is incredibly tough realizing that she is not just a quick text away anymore."
She spoke these words while watching strangers sail her mother's yacht from the Bahamas, keeping their GPS completely off.
At that very moment, the Coast Guard was already towing the vessel, named Soulmate, straight into Fort Pierce. She spoke without knowing if anyone would ever find her mother. Unsure of what clues the boat might reveal to investigators. Not knowing if the active case that had consumed her entire life would ever give her the answers she has demanded since the day Brian first reported Lynette missing. Carly Allred Aylesworth deserves to know the truth. That has nothing to do with whether Brian Hooker is guilty or innocent. It is a simple reminder of what this mystery is truly about. A 55-year-old woman who sailed to the Bahamas with a trusted friend of 25 years and never came back. Her family has been trapped in that agonizing limbo for over 6 weeks. Whatever secrets the Soulmate reveals to investigators in Fort Pierce, whatever the forensic testing uncovers, whatever the United States Attorney's Office in Florida ultimately does with that evidence,
A real answer is deeply owed to Carly Allred Aylesworth.
To Lynette's mother, and to everyone who loved a woman who saw living on the ocean as her ultimate dream.
Forensic teams are still actively examining the Soulmate.
Absolutely no findings have been released yet. Citing the ongoing active investigation, the Coast Guard declined to discuss the examination details or any early findings. That is standard procedure, and it is not going to change until the federal inquiry uncovers something that demands public disclosure, or the case finally moves into a courtroom.
But what Kenneth Ingaran confirmed, the single most important lens for this entire case,
is that the Coast Guard is systematically assembling their evidence,
Working hand in hand with the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida.
This connection between the investigators and federal prosecutors is not just speculation.
That is exactly how federal criminal cases operate.
The Coast Guard builds the evidentiary file. Then the United States Attorney decides if there is enough to press charges. If so, prosecution follows. They cannot charge without rock-solid proof, Angaran explained.
And that is why they are aboard the vessel, searching for those crucial details.
The boat sits at Fort Pierce, held in federal custody since May 9th.
This intensive forensic sweep started no later than May 12th.
Agents hold absolute legal power to inspect every single surface.
Each compartment and every onboard system without a warrant, up until the exact moment their investigation focuses in on one specific suspect.
Where the bar of reasonable suspicion then takes over, and the search moves forward under those rules. Every swab taken, every surface chemically tested, each compartment fully documented. Every speck of trace evidence bagged and cataloged by forensic specialists who know exactly what to look for, even when dealing with the harsh elements of a 5-week-old marine scene. The Soulmate remains at Fort Pierce. The case is wide open. Their jurisdiction is locked down, but Lynette Hooker is still nowhere to be found. She was 55 years old, a mother to someone who cares.
A woman who spent years building a retirement dream around a sailboat, a partner, and the open sea.
She named their channel The Sailing Hookers,
because she and Brian were supposed to be creating a life together. An ocean adventure shared with the world, full of absolute freedom.
And constant motion, the rare joy of choosing the deep blue sea over an ordinary life.
But whatever happened to Lynette Hooker occurred out on the water. Whatever transpired that night either left microscopic traces on the yacht, or it did not. The boat bearing their name holds the answer.
Right now, the federal experts with the power to solve this mystery
Are wearing blue nitrile gloves on a hot Florida dock.
In Fort Pierce, sweeping every inch of that boat in heavy, focused silence, hunting for the truth.
Somewhere out there, Brian Hooker knows that the crime scene techs are on board.
He knows a maritime law specialist has publicly confirmed on the record that federal prosecutors have the absolute jurisdiction to act on whatever those investigators uncover. He is aware the United States Attorney in Florida is tracking this work closely.
He hired a lawyer in Michigan who refuses to take any press calls.
And so far, total silence.
Soon, that boat at Fort Pierce will tell the story. If this video shed new light on the mystery, please share it. Let's get it in front of those tracking this case.
The more people who grasp the actual legal and forensic details of this investigation,
the more public pressure mounts on authorities to deliver the answers Lynette's family has been desperate for since April 5th. Hit subscribe so you do not miss our next update.
We will bring you every confirmed development as the investigation moves. This is far from over.
We are currently entering the most critical phase of the case since day one,
And we plan to track every single step of it.
The details presented in this video come from verified public records up to May 20th, 2026. All legal commentary by Kenneth Engerand reflects his professional analysis. Legal opinions on maritime law and federal jurisdiction as provided to Fox News Digital.
This does not constitute a legal finding, a judicial ruling, or any court determination that a crime occurred.
Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime regarding the disappearance of Lynette Hooker.
Brian Hooker has consistently denied any involvement or wrongdoing.
All details regarding this investigation are based on reports from named media outlets,
including CBS News, Fox News, ABC News, NBC News, and News Nation, confirmed by sources close to the case. Forensic analysis provided by Joseph Scott Morgan represents his professional, expert opinion.
This program makes no allegations of criminal conduct against any uncharged individual.
The investigation by the Coast Guard Investigative Service remains ongoing.
Lynette Hooker has still not been found.
This documentary was produced solely for
educational and informational purposes only.